It started with a single drop of condensation rolling down a water glass. For 24-year-old Rosalind Vance, it was just another Tuesday night shift, another table to clear, another fake smile to paste on. But the man at table 7 wasn't just another customer. He was a storm of quiet cruelty. A man wrapped in $1,000 suit with eyes that dismissed her entire existence. He complained about the wine, the temperature of his steak, the very air she breathed. But it wasn't his complaints that would change her life forever. It was the chillingly familiar flicker in his cold gray eyes. A flicker she'd only ever seen in her own reflection. She was just a waitress to him, a ghost in an apron. She had no idea she was looking at the ghost of her own past, her biological father. The clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversation were the soundtrack to Rosalind Vance's life. At the Briarwood restaurant, a place that clung to an old-world charm it could no longer quite afford, she moved with an economy of motion born from years of practice. Each step was measured, each smile carefully calibrated. Her worn black loafers were a testament to the miles she walked each night across the slightly sticky hardwood floors, a universe away from the canvas that sat waiting in her cramped apartment, smelling of turpentine and unfulfilled dreams. Her dream was to paint. Not just pretty landscapes, but the raw, unfiltered truth of the city, the weariness in a commuter's eyes, the vibrant chaos of a street market, the lonely dignity of a streetlight in the rain. But dreams cost money, and her mother, Catherine, needed her medication. So Rosalind served braised lamb shank and Pinot Noir to people who spent more on a single meal than she made in a week. Tonight was different. It felt charged, the air thick with an impending storm. The source of the atmospheric pressure was table 7, a corner booth usually reserved for regulars or lovers seeking intimacy. Tonight it was occupied by a man who radiated an aura of such profound impatience and wealth that he seemed to suck the warmth from his immediate vicinity. He was Harrison Croft. Though Rosalind didn't know his name, she knew his type. His suit was a deep charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin. A watch on his wrist, a sleek silver band with a dark face, glinted under the dim lighting, catching her eye with a flash that felt like a warning. He wasn't alone. A younger man, likely his son, sat opposite him, looking bored and scrolling through his phone. A woman with a face stretched tight by surgery and dissatisfaction sat beside the older man, occasionally dabbing her lips with a napkin. They were the picture of fractured, wealthy ennui. "Excuse me," Harrison Croft said, his voice not loud but sharp, cutting through the restaurant's murmur like a shard of glass. He didn't look at her, instead tapping a perfectly manicured finger on his water glass. "This water is tepid. Are we incapable of producing chilled water this evening?" Rosalind's smile didn't waver, a mask she had perfected. "My apologies, sir. I'll bring you a fresh glass with extra ice immediately." She retrieved the water, the ice cubes clinking like tiny cold bells against the glass. As she set it down, he was already focused on the wine list, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The 2012 Chateau Margaux. You do have it in stock?" "Yes, sir, we do," she replied. "See that you do," he muttered, waving a dismissive hand. "And be sure to decant it properly. I won't abide a mouthful of sediment." The entire meal was an exercise in quiet humiliation. The bread wasn't warm enough. The butter was too firm. When his medium-rare steak arrived, he cut a small, precise piece from the center, chewed it with theatrical slowness, and then placed his fork down with a sigh of profound disappointment. "Waitress!" he called again, the word waitress dripping with condescension. Rosalind returned, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Is everything all right with your steak, sir?" He pushed the plate an inch forward. "I asked for medium rare. This is at best a lukewarm medium. The chef has clearly lost his touch. Take it back." Rosalind glanced at the steak. The center was a perfect warm red. It was cooked exactly as ordered. "Sir, I can assure you the chef is very precise." "Are you questioning my palate?" His eyes, a shade of slate gray she found unsettlingly familiar, finally lifted to meet hers. For a split second, the world tilted. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. The same steely gaze, the same slight downturn of the lips when displeased. She saw it every morning when she brushed her teeth. The thought was so absurd, so jarring, that she physically recoiled a step. He didn't seem to notice the flicker of recognition in her. To him, she was a part of the furniture. "Take it back," he enunciated, each word a cold, hard stone. Without another word, she took the plate. In the kitchen, the chef, a burly man named Gus, who had seen it all, just shook his head. "Don't worry about it, Rose. Men like that, they aren't tasting the food. They're tasting their own power." He fired a new steak, identical to the first. When she served it, Harrison Croft didn't even acknowledge her, already deep in a hushed, intense conversation with his son Nathan. The rest of the meal passed in a tense silence. When Rosalind finally brought the check, a bill totaling over $800, Harrison placed a black credit card in the leather folio without a word. She returned with the slip for him to sign. She averted her eyes as he scrawled a signature, a sharp, angry-looking thing. Her heart hammered in her chest, a familiar pre-tip anxiety mixed with a deeper, unidentifiable dread. She waited until they had swept out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of cold air and expensive cologne, before she dared to retrieve the folio. She opened it. On the $842 bill, he had added a tip of $5. A single, crisp $5 bill was tucked inside. It wasn't just a bad tip. It was a statement. It was an insult meticulously crafted to remind her of her place. Rosalind stared at the bill, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the calculated cruelty of it, the sheer, unadulterated pleasure he seemed to take in making her feel small. She closed the folio, her jaw tight. She had dealt with rude customers before, hundreds of them. But this man was different. The encounter left a residue, a cold spot in her soul she couldn't explain. She tucked the $5 bill into her apron, the paper feeling as heavy as a stone, and tried to forget the chilling familiarity of his cold, gray eyes. The late-night bus ride home was Rosalind's decompression chamber. The city lights smeared against the rain-streaked windows, transforming the familiar streets of Boston into an abstract painting of neon and shadow. She rested her head against the cool glass, the scene at table 7 replaying in her mind. It wasn't just the rudeness. It was the unnerving jolt of recognition. It was illogical. She'd never seen the man before in her life. Why, then, did looking at him feel like a key turning in a lock she never knew existed? She got off at her stop, the drizzle soaking into her thin jacket as she walked the 2 blocks to the small apartment she shared with her mother. The building was old, the scent of damp carpets and a dozen different dinners clinging to the hallways. But inside their small, 2-bedroom unit, there was a sense of warmth and order. Books were stacked neatly. A half-finished painting of a rainy street corner sat on an easel in the living room, and the faint scent of lavender hung in the air. Catherine Vance was in her favorite armchair, a faded floral print that was sinking in the middle. A worn afghan was draped over her lap, and her hands, thin and marked with pale blue veins, rested on a book of poetry. Her breathing was shallow, a constant soft wheeze that was the background music of Rosalind's life. Multiple sclerosis was a cruel thief, stealing her mother's mobility and energy piece by agonizing peace. "Rosie, is that you, dear?" Catherine's voice was soft, but it carried a warmth that instantly soothed the jagged edges of Rosalind's day. "It's me, Mom," Rosalind said, shedding her damp jacket and kicking off her work shoes. She went over and kissed her mother's forehead, which was cool and papery to the touch. "How are you feeling?" "The usual. A bit tired, but the new medication seems to be keeping the worst of the tremors at bay," Catherine said, her eyes a gentle hazel, searching her daughter's face. "Long night?" Rosalind sighed, sinking onto the ottoman at her mother's feet. "You have no idea. We had a customer tonight. One of those men who thinks his net worth gives him the right to treat everyone like dirt." "Oh dear, I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "It's the job," Rosalind said with a shrug. "But this guy was a masterpiece of misery. Sent back a perfect steak, complained about the water, and then left a $5 tip on an $800 bill." She tried to make it sound like a joke, a story of a difficult night, but her voice was tight. Catherine sympathetically. "Some people are just born without a kindness gene." "It was more than that, though," Rosalind continued, unable to shake the feeling. There was something about him. He was tall, maybe late 50s, with this intense energy, silvering hair, perfectly cut, and his eyes, Mom. They were this cold, stormy gray. When he looked at me, it was the strangest thing. It felt familiar. As she spoke, she saw a change come over her mother. It was subtle at first. The gentle smile on Catherine's lips tightened. Her fingers, which had been resting peacefully, clenched around the edges of her book. The color seemed to drain from her already pale face. Gray eyes? Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, like granite, Rosalind said, watching her mother with growing concern. Why? Are you okay? Catherine didn't answer immediately. Her gaze became distant, fixed on a point somewhere over Rosalind's shoulder, a point 25 years in the past. This man, she said, her voice strained. What else did he look like? Did he have a small scar just above his left eyebrow? Rosalind frowned, replaying the man's face in her mind's eye. The imperious set of his jaw, the faint lines around his eyes. I think so. A tiny white line. I barely noticed it. Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Catherine's hand flew to her chest, her breathing becoming more ragged. Harrison, she breathed. The name a pained, rusty thing dredged up from a deep, hidden well. Harrison? Who's Harrison? Rosalind asked, her anxiety rising. She reached out and took her mother's hand. It was ice cold. No, it couldn't be, Catherine muttered to herself, shaking her head as if to dislodge the thought. After all these years. Here? No. She squeezed her daughter's hand with surprising strength. Rosalind, you must stay away from him. If you see him again, you ask to be moved to another section. Do you understand me? You do not serve that man. Mom, you're scaring me. Who is he? Rosalind pressed, the unsettling feeling from the restaurant now blossoming into full-blown alarm. How do you know him? How did you know about the scar? He's a bad man, Rosalind. A man who builds his life on the ruins of others, Catherine said, her eyes filling with a mixture of fear and an old, deep-seated anger that Rosalind had never seen before. He's from a part of my life I buried long ago. A part I never wanted you to know. She refused to say more, her lips setting into a thin, determined line. She claimed the conversation had tired her out, that she needed to rest. Rosalind helped her to her bedroom, her mind reeling. Who was Harrison? And what had he done to her mother to inspire such a visceral reaction after more than 2 decades? Later that night, unable to sleep, Rosalind saw a sliver of light from under her mother's bedroom door. She pushed it open a crack. Catherine was sitting up in bed, but she wasn't reading. In her lap was a small, battered wooden box that Rosalind had never seen before. Her mother's shoulders shook with silent sobs. With trembling fingers, Catherine lifted something from the box. It was a faded photograph. Even from the doorway, Rosalind could see it was of a much younger Catherine, smiling, her arm linked with a young man. A handsome man with a confident, arrogant smile and piercing, light-colored eyes. And there, just above his left eyebrow, was a faint, pale scar. Rosalind backed away from the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The man in the bespoke suit, the cruel customer from Table 7, was not a stranger. He was a ghost from her mother's past and a terrifying, unknown piece of her own. A week passed. The rain gave way to a crisp autumn chill that swept through Boston, rustling the golden leaves in the common. For Rosalind, the world had taken on a muted, gray tone. The encounter with Harrison Croft and her mother's terrifying reaction had unsettled her in a way she couldn't articulate. It was a dissonant chord struck in the quiet symphony of her life, and its vibrations refused to fade. She tried to question her mother again, but Catherine would become pale and withdrawn, changing the subject or feigning fatigue. The small wooden box disappeared, and the subject was clearly, painfully closed. Life, however, had a way of forcing closed doors open. On a busy Friday night, Rosalind was rushing a tray of cocktails to a boisterous party of 6 when she saw him again. Harrison Croft was standing at the host stand, not with his family this time, but with two other men in equally expensive suits. He was arguing with the young host, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I specifically requested table 7, Harrison was saying. "I don't care if it's occupied. Tell them to move." Panic, cold and immediate, seized Rosalind. She ducked behind a service station, her heart hammering. She remembered her mother's desperate warning, "Stay away from him." She tried to catch the eye of her manager, hoping to be sent to the back, but it was too late. "Vance," her manager called out. "Table 7 is all yours. Looks like Mr. Croft is back for more of our tepid water." He winked, oblivious to the terror on her face. Her feet felt like lead as she approached the table. She kept her eyes downcast, her movements stiff and robotic. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with something to drink?" she asked, her voice sounding distant and thin to her own ears. Harrison looked up, and for a moment she saw not anger, but a flicker of something else in his eyes. Confusion? He stared at her, his gaze intense, as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle. It was unnerving. "Whiskey," he said curtly. "Macallan, 25. Neat." The other men ordered, and Rosalind fled to the bar. Her hands shook so much she could barely pour the drinks. Why was he back? And why was he looking at her like that? This was different from the last time. His contempt was still there, a low simmering heat beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with a new, probing curiosity. As she served the drinks, her hand brushed against his. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a strange jolt through her, like static electricity. He pulled his hand back as if burned. The meal was another tense affair, with Harrison being picky and demanding, but his insults felt less personal and more automatic, as if his mind were elsewhere. He kept watching her. He watched the way she poured the wine, the way she tucked a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear, the way she moved between the tables. Rosalind wore a small locket around her neck. It was silver, tarnished with age, with a delicate engraving of a starling on its surface. It was her most prized possession, a gift from her mother on her 16th birthday. Catherine had told her it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. It was the one piece of her past, of a family she never knew, that she clung to. As she was clearing the appetizer plates, the locket swung forward on its chain. Harrison Croft's eyes locked onto it. All color drained from his face. The fork he was holding clattered onto his plate, the sound shockingly loud in the relative quiet of the moment. "Where?" he said, his voice a choked whisper. "Did you get that necklace?" His two companions stopped their conversation, looking at him in surprise. Rosalind froze, her hand hovering over a plate. It was a gift from my mother." "Your mother," he repeated, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. He leaned forward, his steely gaze no longer cold, but burning with a shocking intensity. "What is your mother's name?" Rosalind's blood ran cold. This was it, the precipice. "Catherine," she said, her voice barely audible. "Catherine Vance." The name hung in the air between them. Harrison Croft stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. The carefully constructed walls of his composure crumbled, and for the first time, Rosalind saw not a cruel millionaire, but a man utterly, completely poleaxed. He looked at her face, truly looked at her, and the pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Her auburn hair, the exact shade of a sunset over the Charles River. The determined set of her jaw and her eyes, his eyes, staring back at him from the face of a stranger. "My God," he whispered, pushing his chair back from the table abruptly. He looked from her face to the locket and back again. The starling. He remembered buying that locket from a street vendor near the public garden. He had been young, broke, but deliriously in love. He had given it to a fiery, beautiful art student named Catherine, promising her the world, a promise he had shattered. I have to leave," he stammered, throwing a few $100 bills onto the table. He turned and walked away, not with his usual arrogant stride, but with the stumbling gait of a man who had just seen a ghost. His business partners watched him go, completely bewildered. Rosalind stood paralyzed by the table, her hand instinctively clutching the starling locket at her throat. The warmth of the metal felt like a brand, a family heirloom, The lie, her mother's desperate, protective lie, echoed in the silent space where Harrison Croft had been sitting. The locket wasn't from generations of family she'd never met. It was from him. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless and hollow. The cruel man who had tormented her, the ghost from her mother's past, the man who had stared at her with his own gray eyes was her father. The world outside the Briarwood had dissolved into a dizzying blur. Rosalind went through the rest of her shift on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of shock, betrayal, and a terrifying nascent grief. Her father. The word was alien. Fathers were supposed to be sources of strength, of guidance, of love. Her father was a source of casual cruelty, a man who had looked through her as if she were made of glass. The bus ride home was a silent scream. Every reflection in the window showed her not just her own face, but his eyes, his jawline. She was his. The thought was a violation. When she finally walked into the apartment, the quiet felt suffocating. Catherine was asleep in her armchair, her breathing soft and even. The sight of her mother, so fragile and peaceful, ignited a new feeling in Rosalind's chest, overriding the shock, a hot, searing anger. How could she? For 24 years, her mother had carried this secret. She had let Rosalind believe her father was a nameless, faceless man who simply hadn't wanted to be a part of their lives. The truth was so much worse. He was real. He was here, and he was a monster. Rosalind didn't wake her. She couldn't. Instead, she went to her room and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, the starling locket feeling heavy and cold against her skin. Sleep was impossible. The next morning, the confrontation she had been dreading and craving in equal measure was cut short by a shrill, terrifying sound. It was the sound of Catherine's medical alert pendant, a piercing shriek that cut through the morning quiet. Rosalind burst into the living room to find her mother slumped in her chair, her face ashen, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Mom!" Rosalind cried, fumbling for her phone to dial 911. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of calm, professional urgency. As they worked on Catherine, stabilizing her, one of them spoke to Rosalind. "It seems like a severe panic attack, but it's putting a huge strain on her heart. We need to take her in." At the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic and the muted beeps of machinery replaced the familiar comfort of home. Hours crawled by. A doctor finally emerged, his face grave. "Your mother has had a minor cardiac event, likely brought on by extreme stress. Her MS makes her particularly vulnerable to this kind of thing. She's stable, but we need to keep her for observation. She's been asking for you." Rosalind found her mother in a private room, looking impossibly small and frail against the stark white sheets. Wires snaked from her arms to a monitor that traced her life in jagged green lines. Catherine's eyes fluttered open. "Rosie," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I'm here, Mom," Rosalind said, her anger dissolving into a wave of fear and love. She pulled a chair close and took her mother's hand. "He found you," Catherine stated, not a question. "I felt it. A mother knows." Rosalind nodded, unable to speak. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes and tracked down her temples into her hair. "I'm so sorry, my love," she choked out. "I never wanted you to be hurt by him. I only ever wanted to protect you." "Why didn't you tell me?" Rosalind asked, the question raw and wounded. "All these years I thought, I don't know what I thought, but not this, not him." And so the story came tumbling out, a confession 25 years in the making, whispered in the hushed, sterile environment of a hospital room. Catherine spoke of a young, ambitious Harrison Croft before the millions and the bespoke suits. He was a scholarship student at Boston University, fiercely intelligent, driven by a desperate hunger to escape his impoverished background. She was an art student, passionate and free-spirited. They fell in love, a whirlwind romance played out in the city's parks and cheap cafes. He was her world. "He promised me everything," Catherine whispered, her gaze fixed on the past. "A life filled with art and love. He bought me that locket, said the starling was like me, small but strong, and able to fly anywhere. But then she got pregnant. At the same time, Harrison was offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, an entry-level position at a prestigious investment firm, a position that came with a mentorship from a powerful CEO. The catch was that the CEO was a staunch traditionalist who valued a certain image. A pregnant, unmarried girlfriend did not fit that image. He had a choice, Catherine said, a tear escaping and tracing a path through the wrinkles by her eye. It was me and you, or his ambition, his chance to become the man he always wanted to be. He chose ambition. He told her he wasn't ready to be a father, that it would be a mistake, a weight that would drag him down. He asked her to take care of it. When she refused, he disappeared. He gave her a few $100s, all the money he had, and walked out of her life. He never called, never wrote, never looked back. I was devastated, Catherine continued, her voice gaining a thread of its old strength. But then I had you, and you were my world. You were everything. I decided then and there that you would never feel the sting of his rejection. You would never have to know that your father looked at you and saw an obstacle. So I erased him. I created a story about a man who just wasn't ready, a man I'd lost touch with. It was easier than telling you the truth, that your father chose money over you. Rosalind listened, her heart breaking for the young, terrified woman her mother must have been. She had raised her alone, worked 2 jobs, put her own artistic dreams on hold, and battled a debilitating disease, all while carrying the crushing weight of this secret. Her anger at her mother evaporated, replaced by a profound, aching understanding. It hadn't been a lie meant to deceive. It had been a shield meant to protect. "I'm not mad at you, Mom," Rosalind said, her voice thick with emotion as she squeezed Catherine's hand. "I understand." But as she sat there, holding the hand of the woman who had sacrificed everything for her, a new, cold emotion began to crystallize in her gut. It was a diamond-hard fury directed at one person, Harrison Croft. He hadn't just abandoned them. He had tried to erase them. And now, after 24 years, he had stumbled back into their lives, not with an apology, but with a complaint about his stake. He had set this in motion. Her mother was in this hospital bed because of him, and he was going to answer for it. The next day, Rosalind didn't go to work. She called in sick, a knot of cold fury her only nourishment. Her mother was stable but weak, and the doctors wanted to run more tests. Seeing Catherine so vulnerable, so drained by the ghost of a past she'd tried to outrun, solidified Rosalind's resolve into something unbreakable. This was no longer about her own shock or pain. This was about justice for her mother. Finding Harrison Croft was surprisingly easy. A quick search for Harrison Croft Boston brought up Croft Enterprises, a real estate and investment behemoth with a gleaming glass and steel headquarters that clawed at the city skyline. It was a monument to the ambition he had chosen over his own child. Dressed in her best jeans and a clean, if slightly frayed, black sweater, Rosalind took the subway downtown. Standing before the Croft Enterprises tower, she felt a wave of intimidation. The building was designed to make people feel small, and it was succeeding. People in sharp suits and designer dresses swept past her through the revolving doors, their faces set with purpose. They belonged here. She did not. She took a deep breath, clutching the strap of her messenger bag, and walked inside. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power, acres of polished marble, a ceiling so high it seemed to have its own weather system, and a silent, imposing reception desk helmed by a woman with a headset and an impenetrable expression. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone suggesting she very much doubted it. "I'm here to see Harrison Croft," Rosalind said, her voice steadier than she expected. The receptionist's eyebrow arched slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Rosalind admitted. "Mr. Croft doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you'd like to leave a message—" "This isn't a meeting," Rosalind cut in, her patience evaporating. "It's a personal matter. Just tell him Catherine Vance's daughter is here." The name clearly meant nothing to the receptionist, but there must have been something in Rosalind's fierce, unyielding gaze that gave her pause. With a sigh of annoyance, she murmured into her headset. A moment later, her eyes widened. "He'll see you," she said, her voice now laced with a bewildered curiosity. "48th floor. Take the express elevator on the right." The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. As she stepped out onto the 48th floor, she was met with an expanse of hushed gray carpet, modern art, and stunning panoramic views of the city. An executive assistant, a man in his late 30s with a nervous energy, led her down a long hallway to a set of imposing double doors. "He's waiting," the assistant said, opening one of the doors and quickly retreating. Harrison Croft's office was less a workspace and more a kingdom. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. His city. He wasn't sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. He was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the sprawling metropolis below. He turned slowly as the door clicked shut. He looked older than he had in the restaurant, the harsh morning light carving deep lines into his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haunted, weary expression. His slate gray eyes, her eyes, were filled with a turbulent mix of disbelief and dread. "It's true then," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're her daughter." "My mother is in the hospital," Rosalind said, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the opulent silence of the room. "She had a cardiac event yesterday. The doctors said it was brought on by stress." Harrison flinched as if she had physically struck him. Will she be all right?" "She's a fighter," Rosalind shot back, taking a step forward. "She's been fighting her whole life. Fighting to raise me on her own. Fighting a disease that's trying to steal her body. Fighting the ghost of the man who abandoned her because she was an inconvenience to his career." She was on a roll now, the years of unspoken questions and unacknowledged pain pouring out of her in a torrent. "Do you have any idea what you did? You didn't just walk away, you threw us away like garbage. You built all of this," she said, gesturing wildly at the magnificent office, the city beyond, "on our backs, on the life you refused to have." Harrison sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, looking utterly defeated. "I was young," he began, the excuse sounding feeble even to his own ears. "I was a fool. I was terrified." "You were a coward," she corrected, her voice dripping with contempt. "My mother was terrified too, but she didn't run. She stayed. She worked. She loved me. Something you clearly know nothing about." She reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a small, worn sketchbook. She opened it to a charcoal drawing she had done years ago, a portrait of her mother, capturing the exhaustion and the fierce love in her eyes. She threw it onto the desk in front of him. "This is the woman you left behind," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Look at her. I want you to see what you destroyed." He stared at the drawing, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch the paper. At that precise moment, the office door opened. His son, Nathan, walked in, followed by the elegantly dressed woman from the restaurant, Harrison's wife, Genevieve. "Harrison, darling, we're going to be late for the charity luncheon," Genevieve began, her voice trailing off as she took in the scene. The strange, angry young woman, the look of utter devastation on her husband's face. Nathan's eyes narrowed, looking from Rosalind to his father. "What's going on?" Harrison looked up, his face a mask of agony. He was trapped. The life he had so carefully constructed, his perfect family, his empire of glass and steel, was about to be shattered by a ghost in a frayed black sweater. Rosalind looked at the newcomers, at their confused, entitled faces. She then looked back at Harrison Croft, the man who was her father. She felt no satisfaction, only a vast, empty ache. "Go on," she whispered, her voice a dangerous low dare. Tell them who I am." The silence in Harrison Croft's office was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Genevieve's perfectly painted smile had frozen, then curdled into a mask of confusion and suspicion. Nathan, who usually radiated an air of bored indifference, stood ramrod straight, his eyes darting between his father and the furious young woman who had breached their gilded fortress. "Harrison, what is this?" Genevieve demanded, her voice sharp. "Who is this girl?" Harrison looked at Rosalind, at the unyielding fury in her eyes that were a perfect mirror of his own. He saw Catherine in the stubborn set of her jaw. There was no escape. The debt he had run from for a quarter of a century had finally come due. "Genevieve, Nathan," he began, his voice hoarse. "This is Rosalind Vance. She is my daughter." The words dropped into the opulent room with the force of a bomb. Genevieve let out a small, horrified gasp, her hand flying to her throat. Nathan's face, a younger, softer version of Harrison's, became a canvas of disbelief, then dawning disgust. "You're what?" Nathan spat, taking a step forward. "You're joking. This is some kind of a joke, right? Some kind of shakedown?" He glared at Rosalind. "What do you want? Money?" "I want the last 24 years back," Rosalind shot back, her voice shaking but clear. "I want my mother to have had a partner, not a battle. I want to have known what it feels like to have a father. Can you write a check for that?" Genevieve turned on Harrison, her face contorted with rage. "You swore to me your past was clean. You swore there were no skeletons. All these years, you've been lying to me? With this waitress?" The last word was filled with all the venom she could muster. The carefully curated facade of the Croft family disintegrated in a matter of seconds. The office became a theater of recrimination and fury. Genevieve's voice rose, a shrill indictment of his betrayal. Nathan stared at his father with a look of utter contempt, the hero worship he'd always held for the powerful Harrison Croft, shattering like glass. Through it all, Rosalind stood silent, a spectator to the destruction she had wrought. She had wanted to hurt him, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused. But watching his world crumble didn't bring her the satisfaction she had expected. It just felt empty. This wasn't her family. This was his mess. Harrison finally raised his hands. "Enough!" he roared, a lifetime of command returning to his voice. "Both of you, leave. Now." "Harrison, we are not finished," Genevieve began. "Leave!" he thundered, pointing toward the door. Shocked into silence by his tone, Genevieve and a still glaring Nathan turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Harrison slumped back into his chair, the energy draining from him. He looked like a king whose castle had just been sacked. He looked, for the first time, truly old. "I have ruined everything," he whispered to the empty room. He looked at Rosalind, his eyes pleading. "What can I do? Tell me what you want. A trust fund? I can set you up for life. You'll never have to work another day. Your mother? I'll get her the best doctors, the best care in the world. Whatever it costs, just name a price." It was the only way he knew how to fix things, the only tool in his arsenal. Money. He was trying to buy his absolution. Rosalind felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. "A price? You think this has a price?" She walked over to his desk, her anger returning, cold and pure. "You still don't get it. You haven't heard a word I've said. My mother is in a hospital bed because of the stress of you reappearing in her life. I spent my childhood wondering why my father didn't want me. We struggled. We worried about rent. We worried about the cost of medicine. And you want to write a check now and make it all go away?" She leaned over the desk, their faces just feet apart. "I don't want your money, Harrison. Your money is tainted. It's the reason you left us. It's the price you put on our heads. Keeping it would be like validating the choice you made." She straightened up, her decision made. "I came here for an explanation. I came here to make you see the faces of the people you threw away, and now you have. We're done." She turned and walked toward the door. "Wait," he called out, his voice desperate. "Rosalind, please." She paused at the door but didn't turn around. "You want to do something? Go to the hospital. See her. Don't send a check or a specialist. Go yourself. Look the woman you abandoned in the eye and try, for once in your life, to be a man instead of a balance sheet." With that, she walked out, leaving Harrison Croft alone in the ruins of his perfect life, the charcoal portrait of Catherine lying on his desk like a final, damning piece of evidence. He was a man who had everything, and in an instant, he had realized he had nothing at all. The price of atonement, he was beginning to understand, couldn't be paid with dollars. It had to be paid with pieces of his own soul. Harrison Croft did not go back to his palatial home that evening. He couldn't face Genevieve's fury or Nathan's contempt. He stayed in his office long after the sun had set, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy he no longer felt a part of. He stared at the charcoal drawing of Catherine, tracing the lines of her face with a trembling finger. He saw the girl he had loved, But he also saw the woman she had been forced to become, stronger, sadder, and infinitely more noble than he was. Rosalind's final words echoed in the silent room. Go yourself. The next morning, for the first time in decades, Harrison Croft did something without consulting an assistant or considering the financial implications. He drove himself, not in his chauffeured Bentley, but in a simple sedan from the company pool to Massachusetts General Hospital. He walked through the automatic doors, the smell of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the leather and wood scent of his office. He felt out of place, an imposter in a world of genuine human suffering and compassion. He found Catherine's room number at the nurse's station and stood outside the door for a full 10 minutes, his hand raised to knock, unable to complete the simple motion. What could he possibly say? Sorry for destroying your life and abandoning our child. Taking a ragged breath, he pushed the door open. Catherine was sitting up in bed looking out the window. She turned as he entered and her eyes widened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years melted away, leaving two young students standing in a Boston park, one full of love, the other full of a poisonous ambition. Catherine, he said, his voice cracking. Harrison, she replied, her voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound, bone-deep weariness. You look old. He let out a short, harsh laugh. I feel it. He slowly approached the bed, pulling up the visitor's chair that Rosalind had occupied. He just sat there looking at her, taking in the visible toll her illness and their shared history had taken. I came to, he started, then stopped. To apologize felt insultingly small. I don't know why I came. Your daughter told me to. Rosalind is a good person, Catherine said softly. Better than both of us. And so they talked, not about forgiveness or the future, but about the past. He didn't make excuses. For the first time, he was honest. He told her about the fear, the suffocating poverty he had been so desperate to escape, the belief that he was too weak to be a father and a success. He told her how he had buried her memory, convincing himself he had done the right thing, the only thing he could do. He confessed that his life, for all its material wealth, was a hollow, lonely thing. Catherine listened, her expression unreadable. She told him about Rosalind, about her first steps, her first painting, her fierce loyalty. She described the terror of her diagnosis and how her daughter, barely a teenager, had become her rock. She painted a picture of the life they had built, a life that was hard and often painful, but filled with a love he had never known. There were no easy resolutions. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and she didn't offer it. But when he left hours later, something had shifted. Acknowledgement had replaced the void. Harrison began to change. He started not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent acts. He used his considerable resources not to shower them with money, but to quietly ensure Catherine had access to the world's leading MS specialists. He didn't send a check. He had his personal physician make the arrangements, framing it as a professional consultation. He started visiting the hospital every day, sometimes talking with Catherine, other times just sitting in silence while she rested. He learned for the first time to simply be present. His relationship with Rosalind remained fraught and fragile. She treated him with a cool, guarded distance. She had rejected his money, so he tried a different approach. He learned about her art. He went to the library and took out books on modern art. He researched the painters she admired. One afternoon, he found her sketching in the hospital waiting area. That's good, he said, pointing to her sketchbook. The way you captured the light on that woman's face, it has real depth. Rosalind looked up, surprised. What would you know about it? Nothing, he admitted, but I'm trying to learn. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a start, a crack in the wall between them. A few weeks later, Catherine was discharged, her condition much improved with the new treatment regimen. Harrison had arranged for a comfortable rehabilitation facility, but Catherine insisted on going home to her apartment. On the day she was set to leave, Rosalind found Harrison talking to one of the doctors. When he was done, he approached her, holding a brochure. I know you don't want my money, he began, his tone careful, but I have a foundation, a charitable arm of my company. We offer grants to promising local artists. It's a blind selection process, judged by a panel of curators. I want to fund a new grant, a significant one, the Catherine Vance Grant for Emerging Artists. It would be in her honor. I wouldn't be on the panel. Your work would be judged on its own merit, but it would give you the chance to just paint. Rosalind stared at him, at this man who was her father. This wasn't a buyout. It was an act of creation, not erasure. It was an attempt to give back what he had, in a way, taken from both of them. Catherine's artistic future and Rosalind's chance to pursue her own without the crushing weight of survival. She didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, at the genuine hope and fear in his eyes. Months later, the Briarwood restaurant was hosting a private event. The back room had been cleared to make a small, makeshift gallery. The walls were covered in vibrant, emotional paintings of Boston life. The grit and the beauty, the loneliness and the connection. It was Rosalind Vance's first solo show, the result of the inaugural Catherine Vance grant. The room was filled with friends and local art lovers. Catherine was there, seated in a wheelchair but beaming, her eyes shining with pride. Across the room, standing near the back by the service entrance, was Harrison Croft. His wife had left him. His son was barely speaking to him. His empire felt less like a kingdom and more like a cage. But he stood there watching his daughter, his brilliant, fierce, talented daughter, talk about her passion. Rosalind caught his eye from across the room. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative, and deeply complicated beginning. For the first time, Harrison Croft felt the stirrings of a different kind of wealth, one that had nothing to do with the stock market and everything to do with a charcoal portrait and a locket engraved with a starling. From the sting of a $5 tip to the revelation of a lifetime of secrets, Rosalind and Harrison's journey is a powerful reminder that the past is never truly buried. It lives in our blood, in our eyes, and in the choices we make. Their story isn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but a messy, complicated, and honest look at what happens when the bill for a lifetime of secrets finally comes due. Can a bond broken by ambition and fear ever truly be mended? Can a father's regret ever outweigh a daughter's pain? The path to forgiveness is never easy, and for them, it's just beginning. What do you think? Can a person who has caused so much pain ever truly atone for their mistakes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of fractured families and the difficult search for redemption moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a dramatic story, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales that explore the deepest corners of the human heart.